Welcome to the BCMA panel, The Business of Branded Content. I'm Andrew Canter, Global CEO of the Branded Content Marketing Association, or BCMA, the global member community for branded content and influencer marketing. Before I ask our esteemed panel to introduce themselves, I'd like to set out the context for our discussion. Branded content expenditure was an estimated $13.4 billion in 2020 and continues to grow exponentially. With the majority of brands now relying on branded content as a core element of their marketing mix, and with influencer marketing reaching critical mass, the time is right to take the business of branded content to the next level. We've brought together a panel of experts from across the BCMA Global Network to share their views on how brands should adapt and emerge positively going forward, harnessing the power of branded content. I'm now going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, tell us what they do, and then tell us something we don't know about them.
Sure. So I'm Aimée. I'm founder and CEO of AAA Access All Areas. And what we do is we get consumer brands to invest in film and television that can change the world. So anything, whether it's feature films, documentaries, so it can be factual, it can be completely fictitious. Usually it's based on a true story, which are really powerful, but really anything with social purpose. So it could be climate change, it could be about diversity, it could be overcoming adversity, but essentially the brands then get access to all that marketing collateral and monetize their sponsorship budgets because they're able to get a return on their financial investment, not only on the marketing side of things. So that's what we do. And something that maybe you don't know about me is that I'm also a voiceover artist. So I do that on the side as well and can sometimes be heard on the radio and on TV and things. So that's always a bit of a surprise for people.
Oh, I'm sure I must have heard you as well, Aimée. Brilliant. Thank you. What about you, Simon?
Hi, everyone. I'm Simon Orpin. I'm a founder of Electric Glue, which is a media agency in London, but a media agency with a difference. My background actually is broadcast television. So I worked at ITV for 25 years before founding this business with two very senior people at one of the most famous creative agencies in the land called BBH. And in fact, the H, Sir John Hegarty, is actually our chairman. So we're a media business with an innate belief in the power of creativity and that media should be there to bring creative to life. So from the background of TV and with creative at the forefront, then branded content is obviously something which is very, very important to us and to our clients. I think I've been a member of the BCMA for, I don't know how long, Andrew, almost since it began, I think. But it is something which we are massively passionate about, partly because of the creative DNA in the business, but more importantly, because we see the positive business effect it has on our clients' businesses.
Okay, that's something we don't know about you, Simon.
I'm distantly related to Admiral Nelson.
Interesting. There we go. And what about you, Nina?
Yeah, hi, my name is Nina Nørgaard Jacobsen. I'm the co-founder of a company called Biites.com. We are a streaming service for brands. Essentially, we created Biites a couple of years ago because we thought there was a gap in the market for the distribution of episodic branded content and long-form film. And we host all sorts of content on our platform. It's documentaries, it's entertainment, it's factual, it's scripted, it's non-scripted. Basically, it's great content with a common denominator that it's all created or sponsored by an organization or a brand. We're ad-free, so people can go to the platform and watch content and enjoy it in the cinematic surrounding that we think it deserves. So we're based out of Copenhagen, but also have a team in London that are working there. So yeah.
And your secret fact?
My secret fact, yeah, you already know this. I used to be a competition gymnast for 15 years. I used to be a champion in Denmark, national champion. And my co-founder actually used to be a coach for the national team. So we're very sort of flexible.
Very flexible and very agile. Brilliant.
Well, yes.
So what about you, Stefano?
Hi, I'm Stefano. I'm the founder and creative partner of Nucco. We are a digital-first communication and experience agency. We use a lot of technology and creativity to create content. We say to change behaviors and perspective, and our kind of USP and expertise is to deal with seemingly very complicated topics and making them engaging. We say that we make things beautifully simple. We're also part of the Uni9 group that won Tech Company of the Year in 2020, 2021. So one of the biggest production companies out there. And one thing you don't know about me, like many, but I'm gonna go with one of the least embarrassing ones. One of my side hustles, if you want, is that I really love illustration and working on children's books. So I work on something like 10 to 20 books as art directors for children's publishers every year. Wow. In my non-existent spare time. So basically at night.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. So let's get into the discussion. So how does branded content deliver value for your business and for your clients? So, maybe Aimée, you want to kick off with that.
Yeah, I mean, basically, well, it's obviously all we do. So essentially, it's about, for me, it's all about the long term and about really connecting with consumers on an emotional level, which really drives loyalty. So at the end of the day, as much as this is marketing, it comes down to commercials. This is about, and I mean commerciality as opposed to ads. This is about, kind of the bottom line. So for us, we're getting involved in, I mean, we say it's branded content, our content's unbranded. It's not about product placements. This is about storytelling at its best and, kind of allowing audiences to really understand what a brand's about. Our content really is about driving people to their social media channels. So it's really this pull approach for brands rather than tagging onto other influencers. And of course, there's room and scope for all kind of parts of the marketing mix. But with us, it's very much pulling audiences to their social media channels with content that's engaging and not overselling. It's about that, like I said, that emotional connection that gives you that customer loyalty.
Okay. And what about you, Simon?
I think the clue is actually in the title itself, where it says brand. As a business, we see that it's absolutely key for clients to continue to invest in their brand over that long period through a connected content strategy, because we see it driving business growth and profitability over time. And one saying that we talk about a lot is that you have to build a brand to build a business. And really all content is branded content, short form or long. But we do know that the research body Data to Decisions tells us that the creative element of the marketing mix is the most effective in driving profitability, actually by a factor of 10 times more than any other element. So investment in that content is absolutely paramount. And it's also key, we talk to clients a lot about understanding the power of gluing together their own customer-facing ecosystem. And content of this type is a really fantastic conduit to helping them do that, helping them to unify their own marketing efforts through their own platform. So, content becomes the glue. So that's very much the parlance that we use.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you. And what about you, Nina? What are your views on this?
Well, I love the phrase that content is the glue, because I think that's absolutely key. One of the things that we're working a lot on is looking at measurement and how you can use the qualitative data you get out of brand entertainment in other places at your funnel. Now we work with long form entertainment, and a lot of it is very emotional and very sticky, which is of course what you want to create. Also meaning that sometimes you can actually go straight from a consideration phase to a buying phase because you're becoming so emotionally involved. So what we do is that we look very much at the data, performance data and audience data and share that with our clients, saying, if you have a segment that's watched 3 minutes of your film, that's great. But if you have another segment that's watched 45 minutes of your film, that's probably a very different consumer. And can you take sort of that consumer profile and use it in other parts of your marketing funnel? Basically making your long form branded content also validate the audience that you get and add new audiences. Because that's another thing we see quite a lot on our platform, that the value of branded content is really that you can add audiences that you probably didn't have already. So it's very much a new audience tool, I think.
So very much being formed by data. Data's informing you in that respect, how people are consuming that content. That's very interesting. And what about you, Stefano, in terms of your business? Obviously that's evolved. You're part of Unit 9, which is a huge organization as well, focusing on producing great content. So what's it been like for you?
I think a little bit of a mix of everything that has been said, but you know, when I read the question, I found it quite tricky to answer, because for me it's like there should be nothing else, you know. And I know it's a bit of a strong statement, but in a way, you know, ultimately somebody has mentioned storytelling, and I you know, a strong believer that that's how humans connect with humans, you know, through stories. And you know, I always say brands are just a new publisher, they don't know it yet. So some brands arrive to that level of you know, understanding of the fact that everything that you put out there is at the moment, you know, there is no difference between publishers in the classic way and brands, or there shouldn't be. And what we see, you know, particularly on the B2B side, from our side, because we have a lot of clients in that space, is that thought leadership through storytelling, that is the biggest part of it, that connects audiences to what they're really interested in, but also as a way of testing the topic of interest, you know, is a thing that we haven't seen that much. It's like, how do you check what actually sticks with your audience in an iterative manner that is not constantly changing? Because I think that there is an element of that iterative aspect, where you have one format, and within that format you explore different types of storytelling. And if instead you have what we call the campaign panic, you cannot then unpack what is that worked versus what didn't work, you know. And if you take that you know, kind of experimental approach, where it's like, okay, I'm going to change one thing and now see how that works, branded content is a fantastic way to verify that aspect.
Okay, so that's interesting. So talking about testing and learning and experimenting as well. So let's move on to talk about some of the brands that are doing well in this area. What examples have you seen, Aimée, that you are admiring, and why?
I mean, I think, well, I always love it when it comes to, you know, Christmas, that time of year, because the brands really go to town on their Christmas adverts. And what I get frustrated by is that it's only around Christmas, that this should actually be, you know, kind of how they're leading continually. And it's that ongoing storytelling. And actually, when I was sort of prepping for this and just thinking about the brands, and, you know, I kind of go back to the past, you know, back into sort of the early 1990s. With the Nescafe ads and the Carlsberg ads, and, you know, and I just kind of feel it was this real strong story that they were telling, that you wanted to tune in and you identified with the characters and you moved with them, and you know, kind of, I can still remember those adverts, you know, all this, you know, 20 years on, 30 years on, or whatever. So it's, I think there's something really powerful there. In terms of the brands like today, I think, you know, and again, these are a few years, you know, kind of ago, but Heineken's World Apart campaign, where they brought two individuals who were completely opposite in terms of their opinions, and they got them to build a bar, and they didn't know what they were doing. And I mean, that was something that I watched at the time and just was so moved by, and I really loved it. So I think there's, you know, Gillette's another one, when they came out with their toxic masculinity ad, a very bold and brave move. And again, I was a huge fan of that. I thought they did that really, really well. And I know there was a lot of controversy around it, but I thought it was, again, it had people talking. That's what you want. I mean, that is the holy grail, isn't it? When you've got audiences talking all around the world, millions of views, because people need to check out that advert. Another one was Iceland, when they did their Christmas ad around their gorilla, and, you know, again, everybody was talking, thinking, oh, it's been too political, it's been banned, you know. So I think there's a lot of brands that are doing it well, but I do think it's, you know, they could take their Christmas strategies and extend it over the course of the years and build on that. I just think, you know, it's so powerful, it works, people talk about it. So exactly. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Okay, what about you, Simon?
Well, I agree with the point around looking back, because I think people have been doing this in certain areas well for a number of years. It's been interesting to see how people have adapted what they've been doing to the present day because of technology and the ability to distribute content in different ways. So I'm going to just briefly mention, selfishly, one of our own, because then I have the most intimate knowledge of how it worked. Secondly, an oldie but goodie. And then thirdly, a really recent one, which I really love, but one that people may not be aware is actually a piece of branded content. So the first one is one that we did for the fashion and homeware retailer Matalan, where we drove both short-term and long-term effects through a show, which was a commissioned chat show format. It was hosted by Denise Van Outen, produced through ITV. The show itself was actually hosted on their homepage of their website. And we cut trailers from the show, which we ran in broadcast on ITV to drive audience to it, which we called Trailerverts, just as a made up name. And it was fantastically successful. It drove short-term e-com massively, footfall into store hugely went up, but also more importantly, consideration factors and awareness factors around the brand itself were hugely strong. And I think without that compelling piece of content, that just wouldn't have happened. The oldie but goodie is an old one. And it was one that was done in America by Buick with something called Tiger Trap, where they had hidden cameras around a par 3 on a municipal golf course in the States. 4 guys come up and there's a pitching wedge lying on the green, and they look on the hosel of the club, it just says Tiger. And whilst they're looking at it, a buggy screeches up and out jumps Tiger Woods. And of course they all go a bit mad. And then he challenges them to, you know, a nearest the pin competition on the par 3, and then throws in the sort of the killer point. If you can get closer to the hole than me, you'll win a brand new Buick. And they filmed loads of these, and it became a real cult thing. I think half the people started to play golf more because they hoped that they'd be in the show. But the really smart thing was that the trigger to the content, they were one of the first people to actually host content on the petitioned hard drive of set-top boxes. And the mechanic to get to the content was literally, they would, every time they ran a Buick TVC, it had a green button, and you press the green button and it took you straight to the Tiger Trap content. And it was just brilliantly done. And yet, you know, quite a time ago. The last one I'm going to talk about is more present day, and I think is interesting. I know from a couple of other questions which will probably come up, how people are adapting the opportunities of the streaming networks, traditionally ad-free, to get in front of people. And the series I'm going to talk, just briefly mention, is Drive to Survive, the Formula One Netflix series, which was commissioned by the FIA, the governing body of the motorsport. And the reason that they wanted to do it was to drive engagement and awareness of Formula One around the world even further. And interestingly, at the time, Mercedes didn't really want to get involved with the show, so they weren't very prominent in Series 1. Because it is quite a sort of behind the scenes tell-all sort of thing. But even by the end of Series 1, the reaction to the program itself and to the whole series was so strong that then they are very prominent in it. And it's run for 3 seasons and has done an amazing job in getting people closer to that sport, whether they, you know, are a participant or they go to races or they just watch it in broadcast and all the associated content around it. So I think it was a genius bit of marketing of the sport, really, but underpinned by the fact that the show itself was so well done. The investment in production was right. You know, you have to invest to get these things, you get the quality. Yeah. As a bit of a fan of the sport anyway, I just thought it was just really, really smart.
Interesting. Thank you. And what about you, Stefano?
So yeah, I think that the principle there is always like you want content that is 2 things, entertaining and informative, right? Like these are the 2 things that you want out of content no matter what. If you manage to create both, as some of the example that Simon just shared, you won the lottery, you know, in a way. That's what you want out of those. So in terms of what we have produced, I think that the best thing, going back to utilizing formats that actually are familiar to people, is a series of a video series we did for Innovate UK called Predictions, where they wanted to find a way to present their latest report from their experts, and we created it as a talk show with the same format as a talk show, where actually when an expert was speaking about, let's say, the future of cities or the future of food, they will then visualize with an animated sequence what was happening, and it was like hugely successful for Innovate UK. The amount of followers on the YouTube channel in 18 months went up something like 650%, if I'm correct, and importantly, the number of you know, the amount of time watched went up 34 times. So basically, people dropped out at the very beginning, and they ended up staying. So that's one of our best results. But looking outside of our work, I think that people are doing a great job at the moment is think with Google, with a thing called Google Visual Stories. They're basically doing these little stories about examples of how some of the Google products were used, but they're taking advantage of the stories format that you see on Instagram, Facebook, and so on. So you see all these quick snippets where you go through them, and they're made for your distracted mind. So they're taking advantage of the fact that you know and you trained your brain to deal with this type of formats. You're just following them on the Google website, and they're not trying to force you into something that is unfamiliar to you. So cognitive load wise, I think it's very clever what they've done. And then I'm loving what MailChimp is doing with MailChimp Presents. I don't know if you've seen it, but they have this amazing, it looks like Netflix, you know, you go on the platform and there's so much good content there in terms of like the stories of the different businesses that they enabled. And for me, that's a great example of great branded content, because MailChimp is almost absent in it, but is there as an empowerment of these businesses. So at the end of the day, you follow these stories that are emotional, that are insightful from an entrepreneurial point of view, and it just so happens that MailChimp is a part of that success, which I think is like the most subtle and in a way, because it's so passive, that brand awareness enters in your brain without you even questioning it.
Yeah, so they become the facilitator. They bring those.
Yeah, they are the magical helper. They are the gadget that makes it possible.
Exactly.
If you want to use a storytelling term, and I think that that's the cleverest way to do it, because
Very
then
smart.
It's not about them. It's about who they help, and I think that the important thing is that the perception is like, you're not trying to sell me anything, and
exactly
it enters your brain.
Super. Okay, and what about you, Nina? You're on mute.
A couple of years ago, Faroe Islands released this Google Sheep View. I don't know if you heard about it, but basically Google didn't go to Faroe Islands because they didn't bother, because it's such a small place. So they placed cameras on the backs of sheeps. So you could have live feed from a Google Sheep View, where 100 sheep running around somewhere in Faroe Islands filming, which I thought was a really clever and fun way of doing it. And they actually had, different really clever ways of, you could also call a live Faroe Island person who could take you on a tour in his local town and stuff. So they're really, really good at, I think, activating branded content in a very fun way. But apart from that, I think what I admire and what I see a lot of at the moment is actually more and more unfamiliar brands coming out with particularly binge-like marketing. Like Stefano says, the really good ones look like something you've seen before. There's a familiarity to it. It looks like television, just done by a brand or rethought into a slightly different format, but it's a cooking show or it's a makeover show or it's something. There's recognizability, and I think there's a lot of episodic content coming out right now that's playing around with sort of a youth series or main character development over 6 episodes, etc. For example, educational institutions, universities. We have one here in Denmark that's creating their season 2 now of following students. It's a really, really good show. It's basically over shoulder with a few storylines in each, following a few people, and it's extremely engaging. This is actually not, I think, a very high cost production, but it's extremely engaging because it's really sort of honest. That said, we've tried a few times to cut together some of these episodic and into longer documentaries, lifting actually the average view time with 300%. So there is, I think, perhaps sometimes it's a good thing to think in episodes, but sometimes it's also worth just cutting everything together and let people enjoy a really long, evergreen-like experience with the brand.
Interesting. So let's talk about some of the emerging trends that you're seeing in the world of branded content and indeed influencer marketing. Maybe Aimée, you'd like to kick off on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's about diversity. So a lot of the brands that we're speaking to, diversity is absolutely key. I think, with a lot of backlash that has come, some brands with some of their content, it's really critical that everybody on screen is diverse, everybody behind the screen is diverse. It's very much representative. They're also wanting to play it safe, where they're not going all in one direction either. So I think that's definitely something that's happening at the moment with the brands that we're working with. That it's, and rightly so in terms of a diversity point of view. Certainly when we're picking productions, as an agency that we're wanting to take to our brands, that's something that I'm looking at all the time. You know, who's on screen, who's behind the screen. You know, we want to be so supportive of diverse productions. So that's a big priority right now.
Interesting. And we've just sort of teamed up with an organization called the Conscious Ad Network. I don't know if you've ever come across them, but that's what their kind of key focus is about, you know, diversity in all parts of production. So it's a very interesting area. What about you, Simon? What are you seeing as a sort of emerging trends?
We're seeing a couple of things, sort of referenced it earlier about as TV viewing behaviors change, then the development of long form branded content is adapting as well, and especially for streaming platforms that are obviously free from traditional advertising. We're also seeing on our own client base and across the piece a greater focus on sort of ethical sustainability. And obviously, as such an important story to tell, and a story that is best told through fantastic content and really engaging content, because it strikes a lasting memory and also does start a movement. And that's something that we talk about a fair bit as well, how, you know, content is such a powerful driver of action, but a long-term movement. In terms of influencer marketing, we prefer the term, rather than influencer, actually talent. You know, celebrity sells, as they say. And I think that you get, you know, a brand is having a reputation and having a really strong point of view in the market. If you've got someone that people already can relate to and associate with, and is a great fit with that positioning, then it just doubles up the power even more. So, you know, as I say, celebrity sells, and the right ones do it brilliantly. And I think it just is a more credible way of doing it, simply because many people will think, you know, some influencers only do it because they've been paid to say so, they've been sent 10 pairs of trainers or whatever it may be. So we talk about talent rather than influencers, but you get the talent right and it's incredibly powerful.
Okay, interesting. And Nina, what about you?
Well, I think one of the emerging trends that we see, perhaps on the back of the whole cookie exit, is more creative collaborations and partnerships on the distribution side. Basically, people are becoming much more savvy, I think, in using different platforms for what they're good at. And that whole interactive mix is also being really more and more cleverly done by the brands themselves, of course, in collaboration with their agencies who are the experts. But I think it's really interesting to see how the different platforms can together become, you know, 1 + 1 = 3 or something. It just improves the entire campaign. But otherwise, I agree, it's long form content coming a lot. TV-like narratives. We have this saying that in 5 years' time, we think the greatest entertainment shows will be produced by brands, because they basically have the storytelling power to take over and the interest to take over now, like the example with MailChimp. So more, long form, better use of platforms, but also the evergreen. I think the whole lockdown period made people reuse previous content. Thinking about evergreen content and the value of the content you created 5 years ago, how it's still, as you said, some of you still, you remember that you watched 10 years ago because it was so good, and it's still good, you know. So that whole going back to your DNA as a brand and working on your evergreen foundation, if you can call it that.
Okay, and what about you, Stefano?
So I have a couple of considerations divided into formats, you know, on one side, you know, when you think about format, I'm not only talking about the structure of the content, but like the technological context of it. And I feel that, you know, very often people, and you hear this a lot in other words, oh, you have to put the same amount of story that you used to put in 3 hours and 15 seconds, and that's BS, right? What people are, I think, are finally understanding is that it's not the story that changes. What changes is the fact that you're breaking it into smaller segments that are distributed in different channels and in different ways. So I would say finally having somebody that instead of trying to cram everything, either accepts that we need to break this down into smaller bits of content that then, you know, basically make you interact as you're meant to with social platforms. So, you know, you keep clicking and it makes you, you know, keep going, or is matching your availability of time. So you want to sit and say, I want to dedicate 25 minutes of my day towards that, and almost nothing in the middle, which I think is great, because you're recognizing the context of life that we're in. So either make me click very quickly, I'm going to give you 3 minutes of my time, and you're in a sense getting advantage of that addictive quality, or the other one that is like, okay, again, my brain recognizes what sitting in front of Netflix feels like. I'm going to dedicate half an hour of my time, to this thing. I think that we used to have these weird things that like 7 minutes and a half segments that it's nothing for anybody's life. It's like, I don't know what to do in 7 minutes and a half. And then the other aspect is like content specifically. And I'm saying that for a lot of brands that maybe didn't want to risk it too much, like I think finally understanding that you need to have a point of view that is not just I'm an expert in this industry and telling you something about this, but it's like, what's your real expertise and what do you really stand for as a brand? And that being gray, being like a little bit taking it safe doesn't bring anybody on your side, and that just because you're talking about a serious topic, that's not an excuse to be dull.
Okay, so as we come towards the end, I just want to give you sort of one line in terms of what you think the future is for branded content. Look, I know the one thing that's guaranteed is we're all going to be wrong, but it's to what degree we get it wrong. And just sort of, what are you thinking now? What is the future looking like? So Aimée, you kick off on that.
I think sort of touched on it, actually. I do think that brands are going to come in and, they've got the budgets, they've got, the independent film industry is really struggling. Brands can really help. And I think, brands will get bolder and they'll get more, I think, brands typically are risk averse. And so coming in with investment into somebody else's project is very scary. But I do think that as they get more confident in the space, that's the direction they'll go in. Okay. So yeah, I think that's very exciting.
Thank you. What about you, Simon?
I think it's bright. Obviously, I mean, it's even more important now to maintain a long-term view to brand investment and building, even when the future is increasingly difficult to predict. And it actually just increases the focus on the power of creativity and where the work plays. Content is still king, but distribution pays his mortgage. So as my chairman, Sir John Hegarty, would tell you, the art of the craft is everything. And some brands still create content for content's sake, which, as he would say, can just become digital landfill. So that power of creativity is really important. As an exclusive next year, he is actually launching an online tutorial course called The Business of Creativity, which I'd urge clients and agency people to look out for and subscribe to, because it's really, really important to understand the power of that. But with all the positivity of this panel session, how can the future not be anything but bright in this area? And I think more people are going to come into the area and spend more money into the area rather than move away from it.
Wonderful, thank you. What about you, Stefano? Do you share that view?
Well, I find it interesting because I think that, I love the idea of the business of creativity, and I definitely think that we should talk in those terms way more, because there is an element of trying to not connect these two things, and you want to stay pure as a creator. And I think that that's an historical falsehood, a little bit of a romantic vision. We always had people that were fostering artists and creatives in history, and so. But our responsibility, I think, at the moment is to keep the quality up, because, before the COVID pandemic, it used to be that you have many digital channels and non-digital channels. Now it's like digital is the channel, if you want, and it's not going to change necessarily anytime soon, I believe, even if there is a little bit of rebound. But, the rules of the game have changed. So it also means that what you have is like a truckload of subpar quality content from people that were not in the arena before. They arrived a little bit like amateur hour. So it's our job as marketers and content creators in this space to make sure that the quality shines, because people, reward us with that element of quality. On one side, though, I think it's great that the that there is no easy gimmick anymore, because it used to be that, you know, you want to make something great, you just invite a couple of executives to your little event, you make it look like it's a success, and who cares about the KPIs? Now the attribution is clearer,
Absolutely.
the data doesn't lie.
Yeah, there's no hiding place. Okay, Nina, what about you?
Well, I just had the discussion this morning with the former TV executive this morning, and he opened the meeting by saying, you know, I don't believe in branded content, and then
really?
we were on, you know, and it was an absolutely wonderful kickoff statement, because of course, I mean, I do, and I think brands are becoming more and more mature, and I think they're becoming more and more confident in their own story, and in, you know, we actually do have a story to tell. We are worth speaking to, and this is, you know, this is where we're coming from. And I think they're also becoming more aware of the fact that they need to use professional storytellers, content creators, to tell that story and move away from sort of the previous content. And I think one of the things that we talk about still is that whole attention. You know, people won't sit down for a long time and watch branded content, but that's not true. It's simply not true. I mean, all the data shows that they will. So I think the industry as such, we have a responsibility to go out and tell that story and say there was time. I mean, sometimes when I speak to people that's seen some of the content on our platform, like, what's so nice and quiet. It's like when it becomes long, the cutting also becomes longer. It you know, I have time to actually, you know, understand the story and take it in. So I think there's a tempo thing coming where things are to some extent going down in pace, and I think the quality is definitely going up.
Absolutely. I always say if it's good enough, it's long enough, you know, so we should not put limits on it. And I think that's always the way, is that we should always push the boundaries. So thank you, guys. It's been fascinating, some great insights, and I've really enjoyed the discussion. So thanks very much for sharing your views on that. So we've gained some fascinating insights from across the BCMA spectrum of members, and some great lessons for the future to maximize the return on investment for branded content and influencer marketing. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our brilliant panelists, to Aimée, Nina, Simon, and Stefano.